am very pleased to introduce Dr. Sal Barbosa, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Computer Science here at MTSU. His areas of expertise lie in modeling and simulation, natural language processing, and artificial intelligence for training and gaming. And among these are creating characters for simulation games, as well as small unmanned aircraft systems. Prior to his PhD, which he holds from the University of Alabama in Huntsville, Dr. Barbosa worked for the Army and the US Air Force for 21 years as a weapons officer. He holds a master's degree from the University of Idaho and a bachelor's from the University of North Carolina, Pembroke. He has a number of recent publications on learning models and on text genre classification with the Conference of International Computer Science and Computational Intelligence. So we are very pleased to have Dr. Barbosa here. So please join me in welcoming him.
Well, thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Dr. King. It's a pleasure to be here, and at least I know at least one of you. I've worked with honors college students in the past. I have 3 actually that I'm working with currently, and so I commend you for the extra work that you do, and I know that it takes a lot of additional time. And I wish you all the best as you sort of undertake that for the rest of your time here at MTSU. And so I'm going to share my screen and go through a brief presentation that I hope you'll find somewhat interesting. But it will be a lot more interesting if you will not just let me drone on and if you'll actually participate, right? So when I ask a rhetorical question, you want to give me an answer, that's cool. Hopefully it'll get some discussion going. So let's see. Let me make sure that I'm on slide 1 here, and I'll bring up my slides. And let's go into presentation mode. All right, so we're going to talk about something all of you know something about, right? Emojis and sort of some aspects of emojis that you may or may not have considered previously. And so, yeah, so let's look at some things that are that pertain to emojis. For instance, what is their history, right? So we'll talk about the differences between emoticons and emojis. And then we'll talk some geeky stuff, some computer sciencey stuff, but I promise not to bore you. We'll talk about the standardization of emojis and what that gives rise to. We'll also look at how emojis sort of impact culture, or how emojis are impacted by culture. And then as you have all probably, just by virtue of being users of emojis, you have all probably run into misinterpretation of emojis at some point. And so we'll talk about the opportunities, the various ways that we can actually misinterpret emojis, and it's not just from the technical side. There's some cultural factors, and there's some issues with when we try to infer what somebody intended to say. So let's see, emoticons are a short string of characters, and this is characters right from your keyboard that are intended to produce some kind of a symbol or represent some kind of a concept. So all of you know that, you know, if I use a colon and a right parentheses, in essence, I'm smiling at you, right? And sometimes some of the automatic software will even go ahead and convert that and actually create the emoji. But initially, when I first typed the colon and the right parentheses symbol, I'm actually creating an emoticon, and the emoticon's origins actually, if you would have asked me before I got ready for this talk, I would have told you it was somewhere in the 1980s when they first showed up in emails. But it actually turns out that one of the works I looked at talked about a short story writer way back in the 1880s that first made a suggestion about using a bracket and a period to indicate, in essence, jokes or ironic statements. But in more recent days, we tend to think of emoticons having originated from Professor Fallman's email, where he suggested using the colon, hyphen, and right parenthesis symbol to signify jokes and to mark jokes within the text. And so the difference between emoticons and emojis is that emoticons are individual symbols and emojis are actually the small images that have since come about to represent those symbols, so that rather than just a colon and a right parentheses, I actually get a smiley little picture, right? So these are distinct. So at least the way I will talk about them, they're distinct from what are known as stickers. For those of you that are, on Facebook and Instagram and all that stuff, the little images that you get, some of those are called stickers. And I want to just talk about emojis separately from that. So these things originated in Japan in the 1990s, somewhere late 90s, somewhere between 97, 99. An individual named Shigetaka Kurita, who worked for a phone company, NTT Docomo, basically put together a number of symbols, and people could use these to actually convey how they were feeling and etc. And soon in Japan, this was followed by a number of other Japanese companies. And so, um, as we look at some emojis later on, you'll see that there's quite a bit of Japanese influence. Um, but for us in the West, uh, the Apple iPhone was the first one to introduce emojis. It came about in 2007 when they actually, without intending perhaps to have these things take off, they included the ability to enter Japanese symbols, so that if you downloaded a Japanese app, you could actually, you would actually get these symbols. And so, in the tech circles, people started downloading these Japanese apps just to get at that keyboard so that they could use these symbols and send them back and forth with their friends and colleagues. And so it was that caused the whole thing to take off. And then emojis became more formalized, as we'll look at. So, but before that, let's just take a look at some of these. Let's see how savvy you guys are, right? So this is your first chance to participate. So what's that top left one?
Heart.
A heart, all right. And meaning the one right under that is a broken heart, right? How about that next one? I'm not going to ask you for all of these, by the way, right? We'll just get into some of these and then we'll move on. You guys are all over this. I've got nothing on you, right? So emoticons on the right side of the equal statement, the equal sign there, and emojis on the left, right? And you can try to guess some of these other ones. I'll give you a potato or two to do that, but here we go, right? So, um, and so on and so forth. And we have the Miley Cyrus emoji there at the bottom right. So I don't know, is that even a culturally relevant statement anymore? Uh, who knows who Miley Cyrus is? Give me a thumbs up. All right, some folks do, so I'm not too far off, right? I'm not decades behind. Yeah, but you can see how emojis are they're funner looking. You know, we can input them without typing multiple symbols and the like, and they convey the thoughts that we're trying to convey a little bit more clearly, right? I mean, for me, it's difficult to make sense out of this and to associate this picture with this emoji, for instance. So yeah, um, and but as with everything, when we start using them in digital devices, they begin to overwhelm kind of what we do, and so we somehow have to standardize them, right? And so Unicode is what allows you to type a J on your phone keyboard and actually have that come to me and show up as a J on my phone, right? So it's the standard that allows us to represent text, okay? And it's maintained by a consortium, and the membership of the consortium is primarily from tech advanced countries, mainly the West and Eastern countries like Japan. Now, in 2009, we standardized emojis in Unicode, and I want to show you what that looks like. So I'll stop sharing for a second and share. Uh, this is right from the Unicode website. Let me move this thing here. So, right. So this is right from the Unicode website. Hopefully you can all see that. Um, but it shows various of the larger companies, kind of what their emoji looks like. I mean, this page just goes on forever, right? So you can see that each of these has the depiction in the various different platforms, but it also has sort of a description, okay? And so something like a smiling face, and you're supposed to be able to distinguish that from a smirking face or a grinning face, right? So as you can tell, there are literally thousands of these different symbols, okay? And they have a heavy influence from both Western nations as well as Japan. That unique code that they set up for each one of these different emojis, right? So each emoji has a code and a text description. It's what allows me to send you a smiley face, you know, and for you to receive that same smiley face, or, you know, a grinning face or a grimacing face. It's what allows us to be able to exchange those things and actually have them appear close to what we want them to be. But the key here is that the actual appearance of emojis was left as a platform specific option, and we'll see that that gives rise to some issues, right? And the additional thing is that there are a lot of companies that actually put together emojis that are not accepted by the Unicode consortium, and as a result they're sort of non-standard, and that also adds to confusion. Right. So as far as culture goes, it plays a huge part in how we interpret emojis. So we have basically, you know, the fact that humans use symbology for communication. Okay, things like letters and glyphs and the like. But as this study performed by Kimura Thallander and some of his cohorts, they actually looked at the frequency and the rate of usage of emojis and found that for the most part, the top 20 were standard across country and culture. But there are some opportunities for biases to sort of creep in. And so we want to look at a couple of them. One is the imbalance in the actual representation of emojis that arises from the fact that it's primarily Western countries that are in the consortium. And the second thing is that emojis sometimes actually bring out biases in people, and we'll look at a study that considered that. So as far as the cultural stuff goes, as you can imagine, a lot of countries have maybe what we would consider to be poor infrastructures. For instance, they may not have running water everywhere. They may not have electricity on 24 hours per day, but just about everyone has a cell phone. And so, and this may not make sense, but when you get right down to it, it's fairly inexpensive to put up a cell phone tower, and the price of phones now has gone down quite a bit, and it's a lot easier to keep people connected that way than it is to try to actually run a landline to each house, right? Which is what we used to do prior to, say, 15, 20 years ago. And so this study, again, surveyed people from 45 countries, and they actually sat in on a meeting from the consortium that try to assess whether people felt that their culture was adequately represented. And some of the comments that you would think would come from there immediately, if we think of culture, most of us think of food before we even think of clothing or the way someone looks. We think of food. And so there are a lot of comments that they felt, hey, the foods that we eat here are not, they're not represented, right? Like if I were to take you back to that chart, you would see hamburgers and fries and pancakes, but perhaps less of some of the other foods that are used around the world. And then the other thing is both the appearance of landmarks for popular sites and the appearance of buildings and the like. And a lot of folks felt like, yeah, we would like to see something that looks more like the buildings that we have in our country. What do you guys think are some more possibilities here? Can you help me out? Give me one or two other things that you think might come up here.
Holidays.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Holidays.
Holidays, okay. Yeah, like, we might show a Christmas tree or something like that, and they may not have that, may not celebrate that, okay. I've already alluded to the way people dress, for instance, right? So if you were to go through that chart that I just showed you, you would see that there are, for instance, Japanese style shirts and gowns, but you wouldn't find something, for instance, that you may find in an African village. There are lots of pants and shirts and dresses and those kinds of things. Some Japanese stuff, since emojis started there, but not a whole lot of some of the other places. All right. So the other bias that can arise is the societal biases, right? And so these are things that we all have, even if we, don't care to admit them sometimes, but we all have them. And sometimes, though, in some cases, they're more harmful than others, right? And so Apple's iPhone introduced the emoji skin tone in 2014, and this researcher at the University of Memphis actually used the skin tone to assess bias in a trust-based game. So the game is called the investment game. And what happens is that the investor sends some value to the person that's investing the money. That value triples at some point along the game, and then the person that's doing the investing actually gets to return some of that value to the person that invested the money. So hopefully that at least it would take some trust for me to, out of a limited pot of money, give you some money to go invest it on my behalf, right? And then, and then the question is, well, did he really make $500 but only return $200 to me, right? And so this issue of trust comes in. And so they allowed players, but did not require them. They allowed players to actually specify their skin tone through their emoji. And what they found at the end was that players with dark-skinned emojis were sent significantly less money to invest, quote unquote, right, than players with light skin emojis. And it turned out that in this particular group, the dark-skinned emoji players actually returned a greater amount, basically a greater return on your investment to the original sender. Unless you think I'm sort of picking on a particular group here, the interesting thing is that this sort of diminished sending of funds happened regardless of whether the sender had a light skin emoji or a dark skin emoji, right? So it basically says that biases sort of apply to everyone, right? It wasn't like all the dark skinned folks trusted the dark skinned investor anymore, right? So it's a really interesting finding. It's really well done. If you're into statistics, you should read that study. It's really well done and well presented. All right. So our last little point here is that we want to talk about how emojis can be misinterpreted, and this also happens along a number of fronts, just like we might misinterpret a word or a phrase, right? We bring certain experiences, we bring certain biases, we bring certain viewpoints when we enter into communication with someone else, and that causes us to actually interpret it through our experiences. So there are a number of ways in which the emoji, the use of emojis can be can lead to misinterpretation. One of the ways is due to the actual technical representation. Okay. The other thing is that meaning is really tied to culture, and we don't even have to think about a foreign culture and us. We can think about cultures even, within our country, right? Within the United States, subcultures, for instance. And so meaning is sort of run through the filter of culture. And then finally, trying to infer what somebody means by an emoji is a really difficult thing and can actually be fairly costly, right? So problems with Unicode representation. So now I'm geeking out again because I'm a computer science guy and we talk about the bits and bytes that represent these things, but I want you to remember that they left the representation, the presentation or rendering of the emoji, they left that as a platform specific option. And that gives rise to certain problems, right? So here is, there are three classes of problems. Here are valid emojis that have valid Unicode values, right? And here is the depiction, various depiction of the pistol emoji. Now you can look at that, and for instance, Apple is the one that did the sort of squirt gun, the green squirt gun there. But some of these look a lot more menacing and a lot more threatening than do others. And if you're an Apple person and you send me this green thing as a haha joke, and I imagine, this 357 Magnum, right? That could convey a different meaning to me, right? So that this lack of a common depiction leads to some opportunities for misunderstandings, right? So here are some smiley faces from back in the day. With Apple, Twitter, and Facebook, scaring children everywhere, right? So these icons, I think some of these icons have been changed, but they did a study on these and they found that Apple's smiley wasn't very smiley, that it was more scary than anything else, right? It did not convey happiness. They measured it on a happiness scale. But again, what we're illustrating here is that, yeah, you can send this nice Google, sort of half oval here, and I can end up with this Facebook thing or this Twitter thing. And that may be something that's significantly different from what you intended to convey. so these are for emojis that have actually been accepted by the consortium. So they actually have boundaries around them. They have a code that everyone agrees on, right? About things that don't have codes that are agreed on. So non-standard emojis, they can either map to something like just the empty box, which means they sent something, right, that I don't understand. Like when I had my flip phone back in the day, I fought coming into your smartphone world for a long time, right? When I had that flip phone, I often got this box, right, where people sent me cool stuff and I just got this box, right? All right, so that's one thing, right? But the other thing is that on your phone, a non-standard emoji may have a specific code that on my phone translates to something that is either inappropriate or opposite or unrelated, right? So you can see that once again, what you intended me to get versus what I got were different things, okay? Um, and so not only are these things in and of themselves do they cause misinterpretation, but these misinterpretations can actually be compounded by some of these other issues, some of these cultural issues, and some of these intent inference issues, right? So what do we mean by cultural meaning issues? Well, different emojis may mean different things, right? Based on your culture, right? So, right? So I'm going to give you some emojis. All right. No, this is another participatory part of the talk. All right. What does this mean? This is a little bit clearer, right? This is a little bit, right? Clearer, as is this. And then we have this guy, right? That's significantly different, yet conveys some of the same concepts, right? And we have this guy. So these are all emojis on different platforms that are representing the same thing, right? So the official name is the folded hands. That is what the consortium calls this. And you all mention a number of the common interpretations, right? I hope, hey, you know, hey, how did the exam go today? You know, hoping I did well, right? Or I'm praying for this, or I'm praying for you, or please pray for me, or, you know, high five, or namaste, right? Who knows what that means, namaste? Right, so that's an Indian greeting, right? When they put their hands together and they greet one another, and so you can see that it means different things to different people. All right, so meaning is very context based. Now let's look at. I'm wrapping up here. So intent inference, right? This is a difficult area because we're trying to sort of divine what somebody means when they send an emoji, and sometimes this is done after the fact, right? So the stakes here are perhaps highest when you're dealing with courts of law, because courts of law tend to scrutinize communication if a crime has been committed or even if there's a civil suit in place. They look at the communications leading up to the infraction and they try to deduce what your state of mind was at the time, right? So emojis in those situations are no different. Right? They have to be assessed. And so it's difficult. They're difficult because one of the things they intended by giving the emojis like titles and names was this notion of, well, let's standardize what it means. Well, folded hands doesn't really mean anything, right? Grinning face, how is that different from smiling face? And yet you'll find both of those. So they don't have definitive meanings. And when you're in a court and somebody gets it wrong, that either means we're denying justice to someone or we're depriving someone of their freedom and liberty, right? Both of those things are really bad, and we want to make sure that that does not happen. So I've got some examples here of emojis in court cases, and I bring these up just because they've been mentioned in court cases, not because I want to take one side or another. But for instance, there was a case that was a sexual assault case where the defense attorney claimed that since the person who had claimed to be assaulted sent a wink emoji in the previous chain of conversation, that implied consent in some way. And it turns out that in this case, the court rejected that particular characterization, but they did so without a deep dive into what these emojis mean. Okay. There was a case where a client sued his attorney for client private for client and attorney-client privileges for violating those privileges because the attorney had written to the prosecutor and said something along the lines of and my client will plead guilty, and then put a smiley face there. And so the court found in that case that was a joke, that it was not a direct offer of a plea for the client to actually plead guilty, but that was what the client was choosing to believe, and made that assertion. And then finally, we have an individual that was convicted in part by having sent pictures of weapons and wads of cash when that person was already a robbery suspect, right? So this is not the only thing that convicted that person, but this was something that helped to convict that person. So maybe emojis aren't just simple little faces that, we spend a lot of time trying to interpret. Maybe they're important, right? Maybe for one, they're everywhere. They're used by everyone. And as a result, a lot of things arise that may impact us, right? The encodings that enable us to send a pistol and get a pistol on the other end, or to send a smiley and get a smiley on the other end, right? They're okay. They help us, but they also can lead to certain problems. Misinterpretations can happen across the technical front, across the cultural front, and across the front of actually trying to ascertain your intent, right? And then finally, it helps, right? It helps for all of us to be informed on these aspects. For instance, a lot of things that we would think about sending, for instance, certain hand gestures are very offensive in other cultures, right? And so being aware of those types of things can help keep us, it can help keep us from offending others, right? So there you go. Thank you all for your time and attention. And these are the references that I cite in my presentation.
Join me in thanking Dr. Barbosa. That was fantastic. It was so exciting. So thank you so much for this.
Thank you all.
And for everyone else, if you haven't had a chance to look at it yet, we have a class playlist, a Spotify list. So maybe you can find some songs about emojis to add to our collaborative effort. But yes, thank you once again, Dr. Barbosa, for everything. This is fantastic.
Thank you, Dr. King. And my wife did suggest send me an emoji, but I have never dug into that song. Some of you know it. Come on, show of hands. Who knows it, right? No? There's a song called Send Me an Emoji. I think that's what it is. So I'm glad I didn't lead in with that, because apparently you guys don't know about it, right? So, all right. Well, thank you all. Good meeting with you. And I wish you all the best as you please stay safe out there. I hope your family stays safe. And I hope the rest of your semester goes well. We're about halfway there. Okay. Thank you, Dr. King. I will reach out to you with the PowerPoint presentation. You can make that available.
Great, and I'll send you our Spotify list, and I'll add Send Me an Emoji to it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.